The alarms were already screaming. Smoke drifted out from the cell blocks like a gray storm rolling through a steel canyon. Doors that should never open were hanging loose, and the echo of angry voices shook the walls of Ridgewater State Prison. Inmates were running in every direction, some yelling orders, others shouting threats, and guards were locked behind doors, calling for backup that couldn't reach them. But the worst part, the part that shocked everyone, from the warden to the FBI agents who rushed to the scene, was that it had all begun because of something so small, so simple, so unbelievably harmless, a tiny argument over a seat in the cafeteria. Now, flames flickered across the walkway. A crowd of inmates were pushing toward the medical wing, and one guard, Officer Daniel Cross, stood alone on the upper tier. His radio crackled. "Unit 7, report your location." But before he could answer, 3 inmates turned the corner and saw him. He froze. They froze. No one moved. The whole prison seemed to hold its breath. Then, the loudest sound of the riot cracked through the air. Something metal slammed hard against the steel door behind Daniel. And before he could even process what was happening, the walkway beneath him began to shake. The riot had just reached him. And what happened next was something no one would ever forget. But before we get to that moment, we need to go back, to the start. To the small, quiet disagreement that no one thought mattered. The tiny spark in a place filled with dry wood. Ridgewater State Prison wasn't famous. It wasn't like ADX Florence or Attica. It was just a big, old, gray building outside a small town in Ohio. To most people in the town, it was just the prison on the hill. Nothing more. But inside, things were different. Inside, it felt like everyone was on edge. Some inmates were serving long sentences and felt like they had nothing to lose. Some were stressed, angry, lonely, and tired of the strict rules. Some were new and scared, trying to stay out of trouble. And the officers, well, they tried to keep things calm, but the pressure was everywhere. That pressure didn't show on the outside. The prison looked peaceful, especially on sunny mornings. Birds sat on the fences like nothing dangerous was behind those walls. But every officer knew the truth. All it took was one moment, one spark. And on a warm Tuesday morning at exactly 7:42 a.m., that spark finally hit. The cafeteria was loud like always, trays clattering, voices bouncing off the walls, officers standing by the doors watching everything. Inmates moved in lines, picking up breakfast, choosing tables, trying not to bother anyone. That's when the argument began. And it began with 2 people who weren't even trying to start trouble. Evan Brooks, a quiet inmate who liked to keep to himself, walked toward the same seat he sat in every morning. It was next to a window where he could see a bit of sky. That little patch of blue was the only peaceful thing he had left. But when he reached the table, someone was already sitting in his seat. Marcus Hill. Marcus wasn't a bully. He wasn't loud. He wasn't even trying to be rude. He just didn't know that seat mattered to Evan. So when Evan calmly said, "Hey, that's my seat," Marcus shrugged and said, "There's no assigned seats, man. Sit somewhere else." And that small sentence, that tiny push, lit the fuse. Evan's voice tightened. "I sit here every day." Marcus leaned back. "Not today." People around them started to turn their heads. Not because they expected a fight, just because the cafeteria was boring and any change drew attention. Officer Cross watched from the corner. He noticed the voices rising but didn't step in. He'd seen worse. This looked harmless. "I'm not moving," Marcus said, still in a calm tone. And that's when Evan made the mistake that changed everything. He grabbed the edge of the table. Not to flip it. Not to fight. Just to show he wasn't going to back down. But the table was old, uneven, and one of the legs wasn't locked in place. So when Evan touched it, the tray Marcus had placed down slid forward and dumped onto the floor, orange juice splattering everywhere. The whole room froze. And one single inmate at a different table muttered loudly, "Here we go." Marcus stood up, thinking Evan did it on purpose. Evan tried to explain, No, I didn't mean." But misunderstanding travels fast in prison. Within seconds, inmates from both sides of the cafeteria began standing up. Someone shouted, "He disrespected him." Another yelled, "Don't let him talk to you like that." Voices echoed. Chairs moved. Trays dropped. Officer Cross stepped forward. "Everyone sit down. Now." But it was too late. Marcus shoved Evan. Evan shoved back. A tray flew. Someone yelled, "Fight." Someone else yelled, "Move back." And suddenly, everyone moved at once. A fight that should have lasted 10 seconds exploded into something much bigger as two other inmates jumped in, not to help, but because they were bored of the routine and wanted chaos. Another inmate bumped into someone who thought it was on purpose. Someone else pushed back. Now 10 people were shouting. Then 20. Officer Cross blew his whistle, but the sound got swallowed by the noise. Another officer rushed in. Break it up. But before they reached the crowd, a chair slid across the floor and hit the wall. The loud bang echoed through the cafeteria like a gunshot. In a prison, that sound changes everything. Every inmate's instincts locked in. Fight. Run. Defend. React. Security doors slammed shut on the upper level, trying to trap the chaos, but that made it worse. More yelling. More pushing. Then someone pulled the fire alarm. Strobes started flashing. A sea of red lights washed over the room. And that was the moment the riot was born. Over the next few minutes, things went from bad to worse. Officers shouted orders, but no one listened. Inmates panicked, believing something bigger was happening. When people panic, they push. When they push, other people react. And soon, the first officer fell to the floor when he was knocked down by accident. The room exploded. The cafeteria doors shook as inmates from other cell blocks heard the noise and reacted. Not all of them were violent. Not all of them wanted trouble. Some were just scared, confused, or trying to see what was happening. When the doors opened for the morning movement, the chaos spilled like a wave into the main hallway. That was the moment the prison began losing control. In the security tower, alarms lit up across the board. More officers ran toward the cafeteria, but with so many doors locked, it took too long to reach the trouble. In the yard, inmates who were supposed to be exercising were ordered to return inside, but confusion spread like wildfire. Rumors followed right behind. Someone yelled, "There's a takeover in the cafeteria." Someone else shouted, "The officers are losing control." Another voice in the crowd cried out, "It's happening. This is our chance." 3 different stories. None of them true. But in a prison, rumor controls reality. And reality turned dangerous. Meanwhile, Evan was still trapped in the cafeteria, pressed against the wall as people shoved past him. He gasped, "I didn't mean for this to happen." Marcus, now realizing the same thing, said, "We got to get out of here." But they couldn't. The lights flickered. Then the power dipped for just 1 second. Just one. But in that 1 second, something snapped inside the building. And that tiny moment of darkness was enough for the riot to jump from the cafeteria to the rest of the prison. By the time the officers regrouped, the entire East Wing was rattling with noise. Doors were shaking. People were running. Officers were shouting into radios. Officer Cross finally reached the upper tier again, covered in sweat, eyes wide. He whispered, "This is getting out of hand." And then, a thunderous crash echoed through the hallway as a group of inmates pushed a metal food cart into a locked door, trying to break it open. Cross saw it happening. He yelled, "Stop right now." But they didn't hear him. The second crash was louder. The third one made the whole walkway shiver. And when the fourth hit landed, the door burst open. The prison gasped. The uprising had begun for real. And as Officer Cross took 1 step back, realizing he was now face to face with the violent wave rushing toward him, the walkway under his boots trembled again. Someone behind the broken door shouted, "Go! Go! Go!" And the moment that would change his life forever, and make this riot one of the deadliest in American history, was about to hit him. Right now, at full force. The moment the guards fired rubber rounds into the smoke-filled hallway, everything inside cell block C exploded into even more chaos. The inmates who had been shouting now scattered in different directions. Some ducked behind overturned tables. Others covered their faces from the burning sting of the gas spreading through the air. No one could see clearly. No one could even breathe right. All you could hear were boots pounding, men coughing, and the loud buzz of alarms blaring through the prison. Officer Daniels pressed his back against the wall, trying to keep his hands steady. His shield was shaking, not because someone was hitting it, but because he was shaking. He had never seen anything like this in his life. A small argument, just 2 men yelling over a broken radio earlier that day. Now this? How had it blown up into a full-scale prison uprising? The gas grew thicker, swirling through the block like a white fog. Some prisoners stayed on the ground with their hands over their heads. Others refused to give up. A tall inmate named Marcus King, broad shoulders, tattoos up his neck, stood in the middle of the chaos, waving a broken broomstick in his hand like a warning. "This whole place is going down tonight," Marcus shouted. His voice cut through the alarm. It echoed off the walls and rattled the guards' nerves. Officer Daniels yelled into his radio. "We need backup in cell block C now. Riot shields and medical. Hurry." But the radio only returned static. Something was wrong. Someone had messed with the prison's communication system. At that same time, Tyler Reed, the quiet inmate from earlier, pressed himself against the bars of a cell, his eyes wide with fear. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't part of any gang. But now he was trapped in the middle of something far bigger than him. The block smelled like sweat, fire, and burning plastic. Tyler could hear men running, but he couldn't tell if they were inmates or guards. "Please," Tyler whispered under his breath. "Don't let this get worse." But it was getting worse. The fire alarm suddenly switched into sprinkler mode. Cold water burst from the ceiling pipes like heavy rain. It hit the ground, splashing into puddles that mixed with spilled food, smoke, and shattered plastic trays. The sound of the water only made everyone shout louder. It felt like the whole world was crashing down at once. Officer Daniels tried pushing forward, but the floor was slippery, and an inmate grabbed his shield. Daniels pulled back hard, yanking it free, and nearly fell. Another guard, Officer Grant, stepped beside him. "We can't hold this block," Grant yelled. "They are pushing us back." Before Daniels could respond, a loud metallic slam echoed through the block. Everyone, guards and prisoners, froze for a split second. The main iron doors behind the guards had just locked. Automatically. From the outside. That meant the guards were now sealed inside with the inmates. Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. That wasn't supposed to happen, not during an emergency. Doors were built to open during riots, not trap the first responders inside. Someone, somewhere, had gained control over the internal locks. The guards pounded on the door. "Control. Open C block. Open it." No answer. Tyler felt his heart pound as he watched from behind the bars. The power, the chaos, the trapped guards. It didn't make sense. None of it matched the normal drills or anything the inmates had seen before. What had started as a tiny argument had now turned deadly. Then Tyler saw something that made his blood run cold. Marcus King, holding that broken broomstick, began yelling orders to other inmates. "Cut the lights." Marcus shouted. "Now." A smaller inmate behind him ran toward a box on the wall. He slammed it with a metal tray. Sparks shot out, hitting the wet floor. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire block went dark. Complete blackness. No one could see anything. You could only hear yelling, water hitting the floor, and the sound of fists beginning to fly in the dark. One guard screamed. Another inmate shouted something Tyler couldn't understand. Then, a deep, heavy boom shook the whole building. Everyone froze. Something had exploded. And it was close. Very close. And that's when they realized, whatever just blew up wasn't random. It was the electrical room right below cell block C. The block was now cut off. No power. No communication. No way out. And someone had done it on purpose. Tyler's breath trembled as he whispered to himself, "Oh no, someone planned this." Suddenly, a new noise rose above all the others, a slow, echoing creak. It was coming from the far end of the block. Something big, something heavy, was opening. Tyler squinted through the dark. When he realized what it was, his knees almost gave out. It was the reinforced security gate that separated cell block C from the maximum risk hallway. And it was sliding open. Nobody knew who opened it. Nobody understood how. But everyone felt the same cold shock at once. Because behind that gate was a group of inmates who were never supposed to join the main population. They were the most violent men in the entire prison. And now they were stepping out of the darkness. The uprising had just reached a whole new level. And the deadliest part was only beginning.